Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Power on the Hour. We have 2 hours left. This is the final hour before the final countdown. We are now at 839,000. We have 2 hours to go to reach our target of 900,000. 2 hours to go. This is the final power hour, power on the hour before the final countdown. And there could be no greater person, no greater guest to have on for this final power on the hour than Steve Goss. Steve is, in my estimation, one of the greatest heroes of the Jewish people, a true Jewish hero to have with power on the hour. I first met Steve a number of years ago. And in Israel, he was invited to come and speak to our tour of the Jewish family Israel trip. And I sat there listening to him, and I literally sat like this the whole way through as he spoke. And I said, we have to bring him to come and speak in England. He came over, and since then we've had many other groups come and listen to him in Israel. And he has become a friend and a true gentleman. And it's a pleasure to have him here today, because Steve is not only a hero, a protector of the Jewish people in what he does in counter-terrorism, but he is somebody who has founded and directs a yeshiva for children with young men with special needs. But he himself is also a true Torah scholar, somebody who is studying to become a rabbi. So it's a tremendous synthesis of what he does in counter-terrorism, in his work with special needs, and somebody who is a scholar. I probably could spend many minutes talking about Steve, but you're not here to listen to me, but rather you're here to meet Steve. So please, Steve, welcome this evening. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Rav Adam. Now I'm thoroughly embarrassed. Thank you so much for doing that.
No embarrassment whatsoever. And of course, no, I didn't actually ask Steve to sit in his car this evening. I said he could be at home, but Steve has actually just finished his shift this evening out in the cold, wet night here in Eretz Yisrael. They're 2 hours ahead of us, in full gear with all his guns on him. I asked him not to show his guns, but he has them there on him. Anybody who's interested. Steve, first of all, how are you doing? How is Israel tonight, and how are you, and how's things there generally?
So crazy flash floods. There were, what's happening in Israel now, thunderstorm, which was predicted for today around midday. It just started in the afternoon, and it's supposed to be for 2 days. So yeah, it's freezing cold. It's weird weather for this time of the year. But not talking about the weather, I think what everyone's going through over here, Corona, the whole situation worldwide, not just here in Israel. So interesting, in Israel, we're actually slowly being more lenient when it comes to some of those restrictions that we had about quarantine, isolation, social distancing. So all that's led up a little bit. In fact, I took my one kid to school today. So that's good news that hopefully we're going to see an end to this pandemic.
Please God. So we were watching the news and following Corona in Israel, but how has that affected what you do in terms of terrorism? We haven't heard much about terrorism in Israel for the last few months. Has there been incidences, or has it been relatively quiet?
So that's a great question, and it's unfortunate if you understand my job in being on a counter-terrorism unit, in that we've had many wars in Israel. 1948, the War of Independence, the Six-Day War, 1967, Yom Kippur in 1973. There's a beginning date and an end date when it comes to the wars with our neighboring countries. Unfortunately, with terrorism, I don't really know when the beginning date was, and there's no end date. It continues throughout. There's always a terrorist threat. And just to understand what terrorism is it's any kind of an attack on a civilian population, or we call soft targets. These are not soldiers. These are not policemen. These are people that just want to go around, their daily lives. And this is who the terrorists focus on, and this is who they target. just to understand that we've been targeted, anti-Semitism throughout the ages. If it's the pogroms, if it's the Greeks, the Romans, they don't only fight our soldiers, they fight our weakest. And it's an honor for me to be on a counterterrorism unit, to protect Jews, to protect Israelis, to be here living in Israel. As you can hear, I come from South Africa. I'll tell you that just having me on, and if I might digress just for just a second, that you know, having me speaking and in this very, very important event that you put on, it's just so fantastic for me. Really, it's a huge privilege. Not only because Seed has done is and does so much. I understand it's 40 years of really commitment to the Jewish people, to Jewish values, which is something just phenomenal. I was so surprised to see me on the same flyer that was publicized as the Chief Rabbi of South Africa. That's actually, you got the accent, that's where I come from. And it's a huge honor for me to be the final speaker for this incredible event. And, you know, to speak with someone like, on the same panel as someone like Rav Warren Goldstein. In fact, that's how I began in counterterrorism. And when I was in South Africa, a young man who just left high school, I served on a protection detail for the previous Chief Rabbi of South Africa, Rabbi Cyril Harris. And Rav Goldstein took over from him. I remember Rav Goldstein then being an incredibly dynamic and very inspirational rabbi, and nothing's changed. He's still so dynamic. Just hearing him speak, seeing not only what he's done for Jewry in South Africa, but worldwide. I was invited to the UK for the Shabbos project, and that was a brainchild of Rav Goldstein. So it's a huge honor for me, and I really want to thank you for this opportunity to speak at this special event. If I may also add something, Seed has done something incredible. Rav Edwards, you should know that a friend of mine connected with me last night because he saw my name being publicized on this event. And this is a friend from school from South Africa. His name's Ariel Tivon. And he called me up and he said, Steve, you know, I hear you speaking. Now, he's living in the UK, and he just told me how Seed has really connected him to his Jewish roots. He went on a trip with you, Rav Adam, to Poland. And it's just so incredible to see the continuous work and effort that you guys do, and that you should be applauded. And I'm so honored to be part of this event that you're putting on. So that's something very special. But, you know, as you're saying, counterterrorism, terrorism is something that's a real threat all the time. And we've gone through a roller coaster with what's happening now with the virus, the COVID virus. And, you know, I think the whole couple of last weeks were a roller coaster. From the Samachta B'Chagecha, Pesach, you know, our festivals, we sing Hallel, we sing praise to Hashem, and then we go straight into the Omer, where it's a semi-mourning period, where 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students were killed, and by a pandemic, by the way, by a plague. And then we moved, after Pesach, we moved into a sad day called Yom HaShoah, and that's commemorating the Holocaust Day, 6 million Jews being slaughtered. On that very day, Yom HaShoah, there was a terrorist attack. You know, it doesn't matter that we are mourning the loss of grandparents, great-grandparents. The terrorists didn't stop. It didn't matter that we were suffering like the rest of the world is with fighting a pandemic. Terrorists attacked, not a soldier. This was an elderly woman in her 60s. That was on Yom HaShoah. Then we move into Yom HaZikaron. Now, Yom HaZikaron is probably one of the saddest days in the Jewish calendar. This is the day where we remember every Jewish soldier that fell in battle. We remember every victim of terrorism. On that very day as well, there was a terrorist attack. So yes, terrorism is really rearing its ugly head, and that's why, unfortunately, it's not just, okay, let's isolate, let's be at home with our families. This is opportunity to be home. We still have to be vigilant. We still have to go out on patrols. We still have to respond to that terrorist threat. If I may say, I think there's a Jewish response to terrorism. There's a Jewish response to pain and suffering. And that I've learned from someone very special. And I thought about it actually today. Driving my son down the road into school, I passed a bus stop. This was the bus stop of the three boys. I'm sure you remember a few years ago. 3 boys who were kidnapped and murdered just down the road. And one person I get tremendous inspiration from was one of those boys' mothers. Her name is Racheli Frankel. She lost her son Naftali Frankel in that horrific attack. You know, we have surveillance cameras following those terrorists, that they were driving around for over 2 hours searching for victims. And what we were saying, young teenagers, those were their victims. These terrorists were dressed up as ultra-Orthodox Jews. They had stolen an Israeli car, and they had the full get-up. They had payers. And unfortunately, we know the end of the story. You know, after the bodies were found, after many days of looking, searching, Racheli Frankel actually agreed to be interviewed by a journalist. I was horrified when I heard the question. He asked her on live air if she was angry with God. She said, I don't understand the question. That doesn't make any sense to me. So he said, I'll explain. You are a religious woman. You cover your hair. You eat kosher. You pray 3 times a day. You send your young boy to a religious school, one of the best religious yeshiva high schools in Israel called Makor Chaim. Rav Dov Zinger is an incredible Rosh Yeshiva. It was actually founded by a tremendous Talmud Chacham, Rav Adin Steinsaltz. You send your boy to a religious school, Vagita bo yomam v'layla. He's going to learn day and night. And how does Hashem repay you for being such a good Jew, for keeping so many of the mitzvot, the commandments? He allows your son to be murdered by terrorists. Aren't you angry with God? You do so much. He couldn't just help you out. You know, Racheli said, I understand your question. She said, I want you to know that every Jewish mother has got a dream for their little boys. Some moms want their boys to grow up and to become doctors, maybe to become chief rabbis, maybe to become a lawyer. She said, my son is never going to go to medical school. He's never going to get his smicha. He's never going to be ordained as a rabbi. She said, but you know that when my son was kidnapped, little Naftali, the amount of love that I felt from world Jewry, the amount of unity that I felt, communities I didn't even know existed, were calling me up and telling me how they were praying day and night. And it didn't matter what kind of Jew, if it was Orthodox or Reform, Svaradi or Ashkenazi, the whole nation came together. She said, you know, as a mother, the unity that I felt, I don't know of a single rabbi, a single doctor, a single lawyer that has the power to bring the whole Jewish nation together. But my Naftali, at the age of 16, achieved unity for the nation of Israel. Jews all over the world came together. And she said, you know what, not only am I not angry with God, I want to say thank you to the Master of the universe, Ribono Shel Olam. Thank you for making me the mother of that young man who brought unity to our nation. You see, this is the Jewish response to suffering and pain. She could have been depressed. She could have been sad. But she rose up like a lion. She chose to look at the positive. She chose to see how Jews felt each other's joy, there's no question. But we can also feel each other's pain. And when we are together, when we connect to one another, it's that deep connection, that deep unity that gave her so much strength. That strength is how she responded. Get up like a lion. Am kalavi yakum, we nation that rise to the challenge. I felt a little bit guilty when I'm thinking about incredible women like Racheli Frankel. I felt guilty when I thought about Yom HaShoah, and I saw on the panel people talking Holocaust survivors. You know, I felt guilty complaining about my Pesach Seder, because this year it was a difficult Seder, I'm sure for everyone, not just here in Israel, in the UK as well. You know that this Seder, we didn't have the grandparents. Saba and Safta, Bulba and Zayda weren't with us. I even complained about the small things. Because of this crazy pandemic, there weren't the delicious soup nuts that are normally, the croutons that I put in my soup. Everything, I was complaining. And then I thought about, on Yom HaShoah, that the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, I don't know if you know, the date was the 19th of April, 1943. This was 77 years ago. But I think what's interesting to note is the Jewish date. 19th of April, if you look, is actually Tet Vav Nisan 5703, the 15th of Nisan, 77 years ago. The 15th of Nisan is Seder night, the first Seder night. That's when the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happened. And I think this is incredible. And I felt so guilty because, you know, did they even have a Seder then, 77 years ago in Warsaw? Did they have a piece of matzah that they could make hamotzi, make the blessing? Did they have a kosher for Pesach, bottle of wine? And I'm thinking how selfish I felt, how I've taken so much for granted. But you see, we can learn from our grandparents. We can learn from our leaders. We can learn from people like Racheli Frankel, the Jewish response to pain and suffering. And you know what that response is? We get up like lions. You know, everything was lost. 6 million Jews were killed. But that didn't stop them from dreaming. That didn't stop them from saying at that Seder, L'shana haba'a Yerushalayim. Next year, we're going to be in Yerushalayim. And they dreamt it, and they believed it. And they worked hard to make it happen. Out of the ashes of the Holocaust, we just celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Day of Independence. This was 2,000 years we waited for this day. This is 72 years we've just celebrated the birthday of Israel. And this is because of the response of our great-grandparents, who you saw in Poland, and who out of pain and suffering came together. It's this unity. It's this care for one another. You know, Rav Adam, if I can share a story that I had, very meaningful for me. I was a young man in South Africa at a Jewish camp, and it was a beautiful camp, Bnei Akiva, and I was a young man, and they got us on a Saturday night. They put us in this hall. They turned the lights off, and we started singing a song. There were a couple of hundred kids, and they sang the song, Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, our brothers, the entire house of Israel. And you know, I didn't understand a word of the song, but we sang it for maybe 20 minutes. Thank God. One of the counselors turned on the light, and addressing the entire room, he said, who understands the words? You know, not a single one of these campers put up their hand. He said, I want to explain to you such a beautiful song. Our brothers, the entire house of Israel, Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, if they are in trouble, if they are in distress, if they are in pain or suffering, Hamakom Yerachem Alehem Hashem, please have mercy on them. He turned off the lights. And I remember being a young man in South Africa, never have visited the land of Israel. But this time, when they turned off the lights and we sang Achenu, understanding the words, I thought of my brothers standing here in the land of Israel. That if they are in trouble, if they are in distress, if they are in pain, Hamakom Yerachem Aleim. I remember the tears streaming down my face. You know, it happened a couple of years later. I found myself standing on the border of Israel and Lebanon. I'm wearing a bulletproof vest like I am now. Underneath my bulletproof vest, on my chest, it said IDF Tzahal, Tzva Haganah Israel, the Israeli Defense Force. And I was doing the midnight shift with a good friend of mine, his name's Shlomo, and we were singing every song that we could just to pass the time. It was freezing cold, it was snowing outside. And as we were patrolling up and down the border, we sing every song, and we came to the song Achenu. As he started singing Achenu, all of a sudden, you know, music has this ability to transcend. And all of a sudden, I was a little boy standing in Bnei Akiva camp, and it was crazy for me to think about that. Because that thought I had when I was a young man in South Africa was for the soldiers standing on the border. Now I am a soldier standing on the border of Israel. And I turned to Shlomo and I said, Shlomo, tell me something. When you sing these words, obviously as an Israeli, he understood it. I said, what do you think about? He said, Steve, it's obvious. I'm a Jew living in Israel. I've never actually left. But I know that there are Jews living outside of Israel where it's hard to be a Jew, where there's assimilation, where there's anti-Semitism, in a country that doesn't have an IDF. And if those Jews are in pain, if they are in suffering, Hamakom Yerachem Alehem Hashem, please have mercy on them. You know, when I heard those words coming from Shlomo, I thought it must be so incredible. Being Hashem, being God up in the heavens, He sees Jews all over the world. And he sees the Jews that are in the UK. He sees the Jews that are in New York, in South Africa. And they're praying for the Jews here in Israel. But you see, the Jews here in Israel are praying for every Jew all over the world as well. You see, this is our secret. The secret of the Jewish nation is our love and our commitment to each other, our commitment to Torah values, our commitment to the land of Israel. That we said for thousands of years, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year we're going to be in Yerushalayim. And I think it's that commitment we're celebrating by Seed. Seed is committed for the last 40 years to those incredible values, those values of Jews connecting to their roots, to who they are, to the Torah. And I think it's so unbelievable that we have organizations that are committed to this cause and that are making it happen. And I'm very proud that I've had the opportunity to be a little bit of part of this organization, taking tours in the Gush Etzion, if it was speaking in Edgeware, wherever it might be. Seed is active. Seed is going out and connecting Jews to their roots, to their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, and to such an important aspect of being a Jew, to the Holy Torah, to something that makes us and keeps us. So I want to thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to talk on this very, very special event.
Steve, it's our pleasure. It's really it's an honor and a pleasure to have you. If it was up to me, I would say keep talking, please. You know, I've got a list of stories in my mind that I know you can tell, and I would love to hear them. But I guess the answer is we just have to bring everybody who's watching. They just have to come to Israel to hear you tell the stories, right?
Bezrat Hashem, as soon as this corona is over, and when we do stand together, when we have that unity, we can bear anything. If it's anti-Semitism, if it's terrorism, if it's a pandemic, looking out for each other. And, for many, many years, I know whenever there's an attack in Israel, the communities in the UK are praying for us. As I said to you in the beginning, Israel, I think, is on the up. Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, we're going back. We slowly exiting isolation. I think it's time that Israeli Jewry pray for Jews all over the world, in the UK. I'm horrified about the numbers, but to know that we can feel each other's pain and that we can look out for one another. So absolutely, we're in it together.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's been lovely to see you, even in the dark, in your car. Great news, as we've been